So now the first equation is the simple interest equation. So we have I equals to Pn and the lowercase I. So the P is what? P is the principal amount lent or borrowed. That's the initial amount you borrowed, or we can say it's principal. It's the initial principal. Okay, sorry, I think I have a typo here. It's a PAL, okay, principal. So P is the initial amount you borrowed. And the N is number of interest periods. Number of interest period is like how many times you calculate the interest. Like in this table case, we calculated 5 times during the 5 years. So the N is 5. Okay? And what is the lowercase I? Lowercase I is the interest rate per interest period. Okay? Like the 10%. So if you want to calculate the simple interest, you need to use the P, principal amount, times the number of interest periods times the interest rate. That's your total interest. And if you want to know the total payback, it should be the P, which is the initial amount you borrow, times the total plus the total interest. So P plus I. That's your total payback. Okay? Keep that in mind. And now let's take a look at this. This is exactly the same example as in our the first table. Okay? We just want to prove that, okay, using the equation, you're going to get the same exact results. So 1,000 is borrowed at an annual interest rate of 10%. And here we said it's simple interest. For how many years? For 5 years. And so what is the total payback? Okay, total payback, that's the answer. To know that, you need to calculate the total interest, the I, the capital I, and then you calculate total payback. So first, let's just copy this equation. Okay? So I is P, the initial amount you borrow, N times N, the periods, number of periods, times interest rate. And based on this given condition, we know P is what? Is 1,000. That's the initial amount you borrowed. And N, we know because it's 5 years and it's annual interest rate, which means it's calculated every year. So the N is 5, right? And the interest rate is 10%. That's all you know. So replace the PNI by these numbers. The I will be, the capital I will be 1,000 times 5 times 10%. That will be 500. 500. Now let's compare. This is total interest is 500. Wow. It's the same, right? But the equation will give you the answer much quicker. Now, what is the total payback? Or the total amount you owe the bank after 5 years, right? So the total payback is, we said it's P plus I, and P is 1,000. I is, we just calculate, it's 500. So the total payback is 1,500. Let's go back to check this. This is the 1,500 you owe at the end of the 5 year. That's exactly the same, but you get the answer much quicker, right? So in the future, when you already understand the difference between compound and simple, you can just use the equation. Now, let's take a look at this compound interest calculation. The equation is much more complicated, but still, it gives you the answer much quicker. Okay, so this is the equation. I is p times 1 plus lowercase I to the power of n, okay, minus the p. Still, the p is the principal amount lent or borrowed, so that's the initial. The initial amount. And n still is the number of interest periods, okay? And I is the interest rate per interest period. So the definition of all the letters are the same, okay? It's just the form of the equation is different. But this equation will give you the total interest of compound interest method very quickly. So now let's apply that equation here in the same example, okay? So 1,000 is borrowed at an annual interest rate of 10% for 5 years. But now the interest is compounded annually, which means it's a compound interest rate and it's calculated every year, okay? So the question is, what is the total payback? Now let's copy this equation, okay? The equation is, if it's a compound interest, I is P times 1 plus the interest rate to the power of n minus P. That's the equation. And based on the given condition, we know the P is 1,000. I is still 10%. N is how many times you calculate the interest. Because it's annual interest rate, it calculated every year. And you have 5 years in total, so the N is 5. Okay? Now let's replace these letters by the values. So I is, P is 1,000 times 1 plus 10% to the power of 5 minus 1,000. So 1 plus 10% is 1.1, right? To the power of 5 minus 1,000. And what is 1.1 to the power of 5? It is, let me use my calculator. So 1.1 to the power of 5 is 1.61. Okay, do the calculation on your calculator, see if you got the same answer. Minus 1,000. So it's gonna be 110 minus 1,000. It's gonna be what? 610. So that's your total interest. And what is the total payback? What is the total amount you owe at the end of the 5 year? We said it's P plus the total interest, right? So P is what? 1,000. Total interest is 610. So the total amount you owe at the end of 5th year is 16110. Now let's go back to check these two numbers in the table. Okay. See that here? That's the total interest, it's 610. And here, the total amount you owed at the end of the 5 years, it's 1610. Okay, 1610. So exactly the same. Okay. Please ignore the decimals because there is a rounding up issue in the calculation because you have a power calculation, but it's the same. So using the equation will give you the answer quickly. Okay. And All right, so this is all about today's class. I want you to truly understand what is the interest and why do we have interest? That's an incentive, right? And also, what is the two types of interest, simple and compound? What's the difference by definition? And also, how can you work out this table by yourself manually, okay? And based on the understanding of the difference between the simple and the compound interest, can you use these equations, okay, in the example? Using these two equations means you need to find out what is P, the initial amount you borrowed, what is I, interest rate, and what is the number of periods, like how many times you calculate the interest.